To the SNRE Graduate Seminar. Today we have Cris Nunez Godoy, and we have Dr. Lynn Branch here to introduce her. So go ahead and take it away, Lynn.
Okay, great. Thanks. Hello, everyone. This is a very exciting day. Christina just defended her thesis on the Payment for Ecosystem Services program in Argentina and has done a really fantastic piece of work that she's going to share with you today. Christina started off her career as a student in the northwest part of Argentina, the province of Salta, which is the most biodiverse part of Argentina, most likely. And Christina studied business administration there. And then she came to UF and got very excited about opportunities for private land conservation. So for her master's, she worked with sheep herders in Patagonia on some very important work to get them engaged in markets for natural products to help resolve conflicts between wildlife and sheep herders. She obtained fellowships from TCD and WEC and SNRE, and then went on for her PhD, and also obtained grants from places like the National Geographic to do this work on payment for ecosystem services. And Argentina has one of the biggest and most important programs in payment for ecosystem services. And Christina's work is actually one of the first in-depth studies with field work to try to figure out how to improve what is happening in terms of conservation outcomes in Argentina with this program. So let me give you Christina, and we'll have a review of this important work that she's been doing.
Thank you, Lynn. Thank you for such a wonderful introduction. Okay, so I left the top right side of my presentation a box. Let me see. It's a box where you can place the speaker view, so you don't need to move the speaker view around the presentation to be able to see the images and the text. My dissertation focused on Payment for Ecosystem Services program. I am going to refer to them as PES. PES are voluntary programs aimed to encourage landowners to conserve and sustainable manage forests by providing direct incentives, direct financial incentives. PES are a growing base instrument. There are more than 300 PES programs being implemented around the world. And the number of PES programs is increasing, particularly in Latin American countries. Researchers and policymakers have become interested in PES program for its potential win-win approach to protect forests and alleviate poverty. This paper for Schomertz and Matsford showed this increasing interest in PES program based on the number of publications in Latin America and over time. The increasing number of PES programs leads to assess their effectiveness. The design of PES program has focused on a large number of aspects. This paper from Borner et al. Summarizes some of these aspects, and these aspects include opportunity cost, the level of the payments, whether to target ecosystem services based on the level of threats or the density, spillover effects, and welfare aspects. But the design of PES program often overlooks two aspects. One of those aspects is conservation aspect, failing to consider issues such as forest connectivity might result in isolated patches of habitat surrounded by developed lands. The second aspect is the engagement and participation of the community in the design of the PES programs. Poor recognition of targeting enrollment and poor understanding of landowners' motive for enrolling or not in PES program is part of the reason why PES program haven't obtained especially targeted participation. And also little is known about the people's willingness to participate in PES program versus other alternative conservation initiatives. The two general and broad questions I wanted to answer with my dissertation were, are private landowners willing to participate in conservation programs in the Chaco Forest, and what factors affect their decisions? And will participation, particularly in PES program, help to conserve key conservation areas in the Chaco Forest, such as buffers and corridors. For those who don't know the Chaco region is the second largest forested ecoregions in South America. It extends over 1 million square kilometers and covers parts of Brazil, Bolivia, Paraguay, and Argentina. Here I'm showing you Salta. Salta is the province where I work, and the Chaco forest inside that province. The Chaco region is a key conservation area because of high levels of biodiversity and endemism, and it also constitutes the largest subtropical habitat for many medium and large mammals, such as pecaríes and jaguars. Yet it faces one of the highest rates of deforestation in the world due to conversion of forests to agriculture and pasture. In Argentina, landholders deforested a total of 80,000 square kilometers of native forest between 2007 and 2018. That is around 46 times Gainesville City. And in Argentina, less than 2% of the Chaco forest is represented by the protected area system, and deforestation can cause progressive isolation of the protected areas. The Chaco forest is mainly inhabited and is dominated by private ownership, with large landholdings ranging from 5,000 to over 60,000 hectares. It is also owned by diverse landholders. Private landholders include individuals, companies, criollos and indigenous communities, and non-profit organizations. In many cases, criollos and indigenous communities don't have the property rights over the lands that they live or farm, as they have occupied private or federal lands de facto or with permission for several years. My dissertation has 3 main chapters. However, on this seminar, I'm going to cover 4 topics. First, I am going to explain how I determine the study area. Then I will talk about the second chapter of my dissertations that unveil the opinions and perceptions of landholders and other stakeholders on pest participation and implementation. I will also talk about chapter 3, in which I investigated the willingness of landholders to participate in conservation programs. And finally, I will talk about chapter 4 that aim to assess the determinants of forest enrollment and costs of a strategic coverage of Pest Program. To determine the study area, I use several map layers and ArcMap for the spatial processing. My goal was to identify the private properties surrounding and connecting key protected areas as my study area. First, I set the limits of my study area using 2 boundary layers, Salta province and Chaco region. Then I use a parcel layer to create a core conservation areas layers. These core areas layer included 2 protected areas. The State Reserve Dragones, which is a little less than 4,000 hectares. And the State Reserve Los Palmares with almost 6,000 hectares. And also included new areas that were recently included in the protected area system by a decree. So before 2018, we only have the State Reserve Dragones and Los Palmares, but after 2018, we have all of these other areas. Then I use a layer of deforested properties to identify the core areas that were completely surrounded by deforested areas, and I excluded these from the spatial processing. To identify the private properties surrounding core areas, I delineated a 12-kilometer buffer around each core area. I also used a coast layer to map a 12-kilometer wide corridors to identify the properties connecting these core areas. I chose a 12-kilometer width for buffers and corridors because they will This will be wide enough to reduce the negative impact of some humans' activities on vulnerable species, such as peccaries and the two top predators in the Chaco, the jaguar and the puma. I use an average of other buffers with applying the literature for movement distance and home range of these species and hunting pressure distances in the Chaco and other forests with these species. The spatial processing resulted in an study area of over 2 million hectares. And it also generated a list of 3,024 properties. I searched each property in a land registry database to obtain information on the land, whether the land was private or public, rural or urban, because urban areas were located in the middle of the town and therefore they didn't have any forest. So I excluded the urban lands, the public lands, and the lands that I couldn't find in the land registry database. And I obtained a list of 1,257 properties, sorry. And these properties were owned by individual companies and indigenous communities. Another important aspect of my study area is the land use zoning regulation. In 2007, the Argentine government approved a forest law. This forest law has two main components. One was the establishment of the Pest Program, in which 30% of the available funds go to support technical assistance and monitoring of the pest plan by provincial governments, and the remaining 70% of the funds go to compensate forest owners. The second component was the land use zoning regulations. The forest law mandated each province to categorize their neighbor forests into 3 categories. These categories were red, yellow, and green, and depending on the conservation value of the forest. And these categories allow different land uses. Landowners with land in category 1 or red were allowed to submit a conservation plan to do afforestation, reforestation, or some preservation of the land. Landowners with a land in category 2 or the yellow zone were allowed to do, in addition to the activities that they can do in the red zone, they were allowed to do harvest of non-timber forest products, selective logging, ecotourism, or silvopasture, through a sustainable management plan. And landowners who own a property in the category 3 or green zone were allowed to do, in addition to the activities that they can do in the red and yellow zone, they can submit a land use change plan and partially or totally clean their lands from forests to do agriculture or livestock farming. In my study area, the majority of the properties belong to the yellow zone. So my first step was to understand why forest owners decide to enroll their lands in the Argentine Pest Program, and how landowners and other stakeholders perceive the implementation of the program. I collected data in summer 2017 and late in 2018. I did 32 semi-structured interviews with parent enrollees, government officials from the environmental office, and pest technicians. I did the interviews in person, in Spanish. I audio recorded them and then I transcribed it. And I use content analysis and in vivo software to analyze the transcript. The result shows that pest enrollment occurs because of legal restriction that prevent alternative uses of land, and also because landowners want to conserve sustainable use nature. And also that requirement for clear land title and complex administrative rules and procedures limited the enrollment in Pest Program. Respondents also perceive an unequal distribution of benefits and costs among participants and between participants and non-participants. They also perceive that payments and program structure resulted in limited conservation outcomes. And they perceive that social conflicts over property rights prevent successful implementation of pests in some areas. Some of the conclusions of this chapter were that a reduced bureaucratic burden, more timely payment of pest funds, and increased payments might better incentivize conservation of land that were at risk of conversion to other land uses, especially in lands that were located in the yellow and green zone. That greater transparency in the implementation of the Pest Program might increase landowners and community trust in the program and willingness to enroll. If pest funding stays the same or decreases, it will be important to evaluate the impact of directing those payments to critical conservation areas, because special targeting for landscape connectivity and capture of grid zone lands might help to obtain greater additionality of the Pest Program. And also, it will be important to assess if landowner will prefer alternative conservation initiatives like land acquisition or conservation easements, and the amount of compensation needed to keep native forests on private lands. So my chapter 3 builds on my chapter 2. In chapter 3, I was interested in investigating which forest conservation programs will landholders prefer. How could the current Argentinian Pest Program be altered to increase enrollment? And what payment per hectare do landowners require to conserve forests? I collected data from March to December in 2019. I did 81 in-person surveys with individual landowners, indigenous communities, private companies, and non-profit organizations. I used an adapted version of the choice behavioral model of McFadden 2001 as my conceptual framework. This model included concepts such as knowledge, the reasons why they would own a forest, their attitudes toward forest policies, their preferences, and land and owner characteristics. I also used the random utility model as my analytical framework. This random utility model assumes that individuals will select the alternative with the highest perceived utility from a set of offered alternatives. So if you remember from the spatial processing, I identified 1,257 private property, and I use a governmental tax databases and online telephone directories to obtain information on each of these properties. Information about their income activity of the owner, what type of owner it was an individual or a company, and more importantly, an address, because I wanted to survey the owners. So of the 1,257 properties, I excluded properties owned by people who live in other provinces, that they didn't live in Salta, and properties for which I wasn't able to find any information of the owner. So it resulted in 260 properties that were owned by 154 owners. Because of the number, I aimed to survey all of them, but I was only able to survey 81. And I used for the analysis the SAS program to analyze the answer for the surveys. The surveys from this chapter has two parts. One were direct questions and choice scenarios. For the direct question, I asked respondents which forest conservation agreement they would prefer to enroll in. And the options were if they were willing to sell the land or obtain a tax reduction, or they wanted to sell or donate their developers' rights, that is similar to a conservation easement, or if they would prefer to enroll in a Pest Program, or none of these options. For the choice scenario, each choice scenario, this is an example of one choice scenario. Each choice scenario has 3 alternatives Program A, Program B, and none of the alternative. And to design this alternative configured PEST program, I used 3 attributes. The attributes were forest uses, contract length, and payment. For forest use, I have 4 labels: conservation, ecotourism, timber production, and silvopasture. For contract length, it went for 5 years to 25 years. And the payment that this choice scenario show went from $2 per hectare per year to $32. The number of choice scenarios that can be generated from different combination of all of these attribute levels can be very, very high. So I used SAS program to produce an efficient design, and I obtained 12 choices scenario. And still asking each person 12 scenario can be very tiring. And so I divided these 12 scenarios into 3 survey versions of each of them with 4 choices scenarios. Results show that respondents prefer to enroll in PEST program and also obtain tax reduction in return for forest conservation. If there were indigenous communities, they were more likely to sell or donate their developer rights. If they have positive attitudes toward regulatory policies tools, they were less likely to sell their land, but they were most likely to enroll in a PEST program. If they were a company, they were less likely to sell the land. But if their property was difficult to access, or if their main income source came from commercial agriculture, or if they knew about the PEST program, they were more likely to sell their land. If they knew about the PEST program, they were less likely to opt for receiving a tax reduction. But if their property was located in the red zone, they were more likely to opt for receiving a tax reduction. Regarding the preferences for program attributes, respondents prefer to engage in silvopasture and not to engage in ecotourism and timber production relative to the baseline of conservation. They also demonstrated heterogeneity of preferences with respect to engaging in ecotourism and silvopasture, with some respondents preferring conservation over these 2 types of forest. They demonstrated heterogeneity of preferences for contract length, with some respondents preferring longer contracts. They prefer higher contract payments. And they prefer not to be obligated to enroll in PEST, yet they demonstrated heterogeneity of preferences, meaning that some respondents prefer to enroll in PEST if they knew about the PEST program or if they own large properties, more than 3,600 hectares, they were most likely to opt for not enrolling in PEST. Regarding the compensation, landowners require around 40 cents per hectare increase in payment for each additional contract year. On average, respondents require around $27 per hectare per year to enroll in a PEST program that allows them to do conservation. Around $37 to enroll in a PEST program that allows them to do silvopasture. Around $68 for a PEST program that permits timber production, and $69 is the PEST program allows to do ecotourism. The main conclusions of these chapters are that diverse factors like knowledge about the programs, reasons to own a forest, attitudes toward forest conservation policies, and characteristics of the owner of the land influence landowner choices for conservation options. Also, landowners were more likely to choose PEST program and tax reduction in return for forest conservation over other types of conservation agreements. Yet there are opportunities for land acquisition. Policymakers should avoid one-size-fits-all conservation strategies because there are opportunities for enrolling a wide range of individuals. Opportunities for conservationism and adoption might exist among indigenous communities. And landowner participation in PEST could increase if the program offers higher cash payment and silvopasture as the permitted activity. Here I included an awesome picture. It is an Argentinian boa eating a Chaco mara in the Chaco forest. I didn't mean to share this picture, but this type of interaction happens when the forests are functional. And I included this picture because our brain can focus for many, many minutes and it needs a break. And so I also need you to be very awake for my last chapter. So here, my last chapter. So in my last chapter, I look beyond the binary yes or no answer that I was looking in my previous chapter. Because when a landholder says is willing to participate and enroll his or her land in PEST, what does it mean? Will she enroll all the land, a portion of it, and how much? So in chapter 4, I asked what are the factors that explain the proportion of forests that landowners are willing to enroll under different PEST program configurations? And what is the estimated amount of funds that will be required to increase the spatial coverage of pests throughout the study landscape, and how these compare with current pest payment levels for the region? On this chapter, I use the database that I generated from the Spatial Processing, and I also use the data from the surveys. But in this case, I did the analysis of the choice scenarios in an R program. The difference was that in the choice scenario, if a respondent chose to enroll in program A or B, then I asked how many hectares of forest will you enroll under the option you chose? I use a generalized linear mix effect model to do the analysis. The dependent variable was the percentage of forests willing to enroll in alternative configured or PEST program. And I used 6 covariants. 3 of them were related to the attributes of the PEST program and were contract length, the annual payment, and the forest uses permitted. And the other 3 were related to the attributes of the land, the size of the forest, the land use zoning, and whether the land was ever enrolled or not in PEST. The result for observed PEST enrollment coverage showed that less than 5% of the hectares of my study area were enrolled in PEST by 2017. And on average, the program was paying $7 per hectare per year. Only payment and the permitted activity of the foresting lands show a statistically strong relationship with the percentage of enrolled forest. The percentage of enrolled forest increased with increased payments. And for a given payment level, respondents were willing to enroll a higher percent of forest in silvopasture than in all other activities. And in decreasing order of preferences, respondents chose to enroll more hectares under conservation, then in ecotourism, and finally in timber production. And not even the highest payment of 32 hectares per year that I provided in the surveys was on average sufficient for the landholders to enroll 100% of the land. On average, and independently of other variables, landholders were willing to enroll only 30% of the forest with a payment of $32 per hectare per year. Silvopasture was the permitted activity on the foresting lands that will attract the highest percentage of forests enrolled, and with a payment of $32 per hectare per year, landowners will be willing to enroll 59 of their forests under silvopasture. And under the same payment levels, they will be willing to enroll 34% of their forests under conservation, 28 in ecotourism, and 14 for timber production. And the overall estimated amount of forest that land owners will enroll when 32 hectares per year is around 30% of the starting landscape. And it will cost around $19,700,000 per year. The conclusion of this chapter were that program configurations, like the level of the payment level and the permitted activity, are important determinants of pest coverage. Also, silvopasture was the activity that was related to the highest percent of forest enrollment, followed by conservation, ecotourism, and timber production. Even with the highest payment level offered to participants, which is 4.6 times higher than the current payment, it will be insufficient for landowners to enroll 100% of the forest. We will only enroll 30% of the forest. And protecting 100% of the starting landscape and the pest program will require funds to increase approximately 8 times from the current levels. So buying land for conservation might be an alternative approach. What are some of the summaries of my dissertation? Are private landholders willing to participate in conservation programs in the Chaco, and what factors affect their decisions? Yes, I mean, they are willing to participate in the diverse conservation agreements like tax reduction and Pest Program. And there are also opportunities for enrolling a wide range of individuals. Adoption of conservation easement might exist among indigenous communities. Chances to engage landowner in conservation increase if factors such as program configurations, land characteristics, and owner characteristics are considered in the design of conservation agreements. And participation in pest could increase if the program offers higher payment and silvopasture as the permitted activity. And landowners, absentee landowners, own several hectares of the key conservation areas in the Chaco, such as buffers and corridor. My research didn't include absentee landowners, and their preferences for conservation agreement might differ from the local landowners because probably they have purchased the land for production rather than just inherited. And will participation in Pest Program help to conserve key conservation areas in the Chaco, such as buffers and corridor? Well, Pest alone might not be sufficient for conserving a sufficient habitat for wildlife species under the current funding conditions. Also, silvopasture, which is the most preferred activity by landowners, is not necessarily conserving forests. The silvopasture approach in Argentina allows the reduction of the tree covers and introduction of exotic grasses to enhance cattle grazing. And the introduction of cattle is also threatening the recovery of the forest. And protecting 100% of the starting landscape and the pest program is expensive. And so what are some of the alternatives? We could be buying land for conservation. The current selling price of land in the Chaco is around $200 per hectare. So with the 19 millions that we calculated to enroll 30% of the starting landscape, we could buy that 30% in almost 6 years. And this sounds like a good idea, but if we compare this with the actual current pest funding, it will take approximately 800 years to buy that 30%. So perhaps what the strategy could be to buy as much land as possible and try to engage in the remaining spots in pests, but under conservation plans. Another alternative will be to enforce the lands use regulation of the forest law, as currently lands that are located in the red zone are not allowed to the forest and they are being secured. And also we should provide some time exceptions for the lands in the red zone. And with that, I wanna thank to my committee members, Mickey Swisher from the Family, Youth and Community Services Department at UF, Elizabeth Pinar, my advisor, she's located in the University of Georgia. Jose Soto, he's located in the University of Arizona, and Lynn Branch, professor in the Wildlife Conservation and Ecology here at UF. Also, I want to thank my field assistant, people that participated in my survey, my husband, some local people who helped me to find the landholders that I needed to interview. I want to thank to the School of Natural Resources and Environment, the Wildlife Ecology and Conservation, and the Tropical Conservation and Development Program for funding my PhD. And I want to thank the Neotropical Grassland Conservation, the RUFOR, and the TCD for funding my research. And with that, I can take some questions.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Cristina, for that presentation. So we have some time for questions. If you are in the Zoom chat, you can unmute your mic or type in the chat box. If you are watching via YouTube, you can type in the chat box there as well. So go ahead. And I have a question for you while we're waiting for people to collect their thoughts. Can you talk about when you were distributing those surveys, were people reluctant to take the surveys, or was it easy to get people to talk to you? Or can you talk at all about the experience of recruiting?
Well, that was a big challenge. So it's a very extensive area. It sometimes took me 6 hours to go to a town. In some cases, I only have the name of, I only knew that the name of the town. So I would just go to a town and start asking around if they knew the person. I will have some time and address and go to this address, and it was an abandoned house or an empty plot. So I feel like a detective most of the time, trying to find people, or maybe on Facebook, on online telephone directories, or asking around maybe if they knew the person. And sometimes they will just cancel the meeting. So I will travel 6 hours to a place the night before, because if they ask me to meet at 8 a.m., then I have to go the night before to stay in a place, and then get a text that say, oh, I can't make it today. Can you come maybe next Thursday? So I have to go back again to the main city. But once I was able to reach out to people, they really engaged about my research. The one that say no to participating in my survey was because they were very busy. They were very busy. Some of them are traveling a lot between the land and the main city, and so they didn't have time. And doing in-person surveys, it has the advantage that they will answer to all your questions. So I have all my surveys totally completed. So that's but chasing people, it was frustrated at some point.
It sounds like you put a lot of investment in to make sure you got all of those answers, all those questions answered. Sounds very time intensive.
Yeah, it was. And also going through the databases, because the GIS gave me 3,000 properties, and I have to enter, I use like 3 databases, so I have to enter all of them in each of the databases. So it took a lot of effort.
So it sounds you're like ready to be academia doesn't work out,
Sorry, I couldn't get my internet.
Oh, sorry. I just said you're ready to become a detective as an alternative career.
Yeah.
Do we have any other questions for Cristina today?
I do. I mean, hi, Cristina.
Hey, Elizabeth.
End of your talk. I was racing to get to it. So, you know, one of the things I like to ask a student when they've gone through all this work and they've done everything you've done is, if a student came to you who's starting their PhD or their master's and they say, I'm getting ready to do my PhD or my master's, I want to do field-based research surveys, I went to study some kind of conservation program like PES, what are the pieces of advice you would give them about how to be successful and how to think about framing their study based on everything you've learned? Because you had a vision when you started, and then there's the reality. So if you could give them 2 or 3 pieces of advice, what would you tell them to do to help them to be successful?
That's a good question. So many pieces. They should start for having not only plan A, but B, C, D to Z, you know, because everything can change. I mean, right now we see it with the COVID. And right now you can, like, I wouldn't be able to collect data because in the case of Argentina, we can't send surveys via mail or get the email. It has to be just going there and knock their doors. And so you have to be very flexible. If people say to you, hey, I cancel today and then cancel another time, you have to be very patient and always smile and say, okay, no problem. I'm coming in 2 days. So yeah, it has to be, you need to be very flexible about this. You as a student, you can try to cover all the aspects, but know that it won't be never sufficient, or you will never get it right, because things are unpredictable, things happen, and you can manage those.
I like those answers. Tell me, the questions you ended up answering in your dissertation, were those the ones you expected to be answering, or did the questions change as you went along?
No, they change a lot. They change a lot, and it's nice because at the end, the chapter start building on the previous one, right? So in my chapter 2, when I did the interviews, it kind of became clear, okay, there is some problem with the payment, maybe not sufficient. People is enrolling because they don't have an option. There is these foreign laws with some land use regulations. And so then came this other question, okay, maybe PES is not the solution. And we always, I enter my PhD, okay, this is the solution. So how do we improve it? And then you realize, okay, maybe it's not the solution. And what else can be the solution? So that kind of built in chapter 3. But then when I start asking people, okay, will you enroll or not? And they will say yes, no. But then I start wondering, what does it mean? I mean, you say yes, but maybe they want to enroll only 5% of the lands. And properties in Chaco are huge. I mean, they can go over 60,000 hectares. And if they say yes, but they put only 500, that really doesn't help with the connectivity of forests in my study landscape. And so that ended up building on the next chapter. And yes, questions always change. I believe that they always change.
I would agree. And isn't it nice to know that there might be a massive literature on something like there is on PES, and you still find out there's so much information to be found and that it's not all already in the literature.
Yeah.
Always contributions to be made. Good job, Cristina.
Thank you, Elizabeth.
Well, we do have a few more minutes if anyone has any other questions.
Cristina, can you tell us how you plan to build on this work for the next phase of after you have finished completing your dissertation and going back to Argentina?
Yes, I'm going back in Argentina in December, a little bit less than a month. So after that, in a few weeks actually, once I completed final submission, I will start working on the publications. And then I applied for a postdoc position in Argentina, in the Chaco, in my province. And what they wanted to see is what are the ecological and economic conditions that will make people to adopt conservation programs, with conservation plans, within this Pest program. So I already know how to find the people. And so, and so that's a little bit more of my next step.
And once your postdoc's over, what would you like to do? I mean, you've learned so much. If you could just decide, this is my dream thing to do next based on what I've learned, what would be the question you'd be trying to answer? What would be the research you'd be trying to do? Would you be doing research?
Yes, I will be doing research. I want to continue doing research. So the organization where I will be working for my postdoc, they created a research center, and it's in the first stage. So when I started my PhD, I wanted to create a research center in Salta that will collect data and share. But this organization started it, and so I wouldn't mind to join them and don't start from scratch. And so the idea is that after I finish the postdoc, I will be join the CONICET, which is the National Research of Argentina, within this research unit that is based in Salta.
Well, it looks like that's about all the time we have. Thank you so much, Cristina, for your presentation today. And thank you for everyone joining us. And we will have another presentation next Monday at this time. So feel free to join us then. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you.